Welcome to reform thinking.
Yeah.
Picture a guy who just won the largest lottery jackpot in human history.
Okay.
Now imagine that same guy also happens to be the chief executive officer of the largest, most successful technology conglomerate on Earth. He dictates global markets before he even finishes his morning coffee.
Right. He has it
He
all.
has everything. And to top it all off, he possesses the intellect of a Nobel laureate. When you see someone holding all those cards, unlimited financial resources, absolute structural control over his environment, and this brilliant analytical mind, there is an automatic, almost subconscious assumption you make.
You think he beat the system?
Precisely. You look at his life and assume he solved the puzzle of human happiness. You think to yourself, well, if I had his bank account, his freedom, and his brain, my anxieties would just vanish. I would be completely at peace.
I mean, that is the standard mathematical equation of the human heart.
That is.
We think endless resources plus vast intellect equals guaranteed joy.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that sadness or anxiety or a lack of fulfillment is just a resource allocation problem. Like, if you just had more money or a better house, a more prestigious career, or, a more curated social circle, the math would finally work out. You would balance the ledger of your life and achieve total satisfaction.
Today, we are putting that specific mathematical equation to the test. This is a special deep dive into the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, looking specifically at chapter 2, verses 1 through 26.
Yeah.
We are examining two rigorous theological analyses that center on a single fascinating theme: good gifts make bad gods. We have the historical record of a man who ran a calculated, incredibly expensive experiment on wealth, success, and the pursuit of happiness.
And the results are, they're completely devastating.
They really are. We are bringing together sources that examine how to find true, lasting joy in a world that feels frustratingly temporary. The mission for you today is highly specific. You are going to learn how to find actual resting joy in a fleeting life without taking the good things you possess and turning them into idols that will eventually crush you.
Right.
3,000 years ago, the wisest man in history ran a massive experiment to find out if unlimited money and pleasure actually cure human anxiety. And his findings shatter everything our modern culture dictates about the good life.
Well, the author of this text is King Solomon. And before we look at his experiment, we really have to establish his credentials and his historical setting, because his environment is what makes the experiment valid.
Yeah, setting the stage is crucial.
Right. As a point of historical accuracy, the sources we are looking at reject the critical scholarship that tries to claim this book was written by an anonymous post-exilic editor.
Like someone writing much later.
Yeah, by post-exilic, scholars mean someone writing centuries later, after the nation of Israel returned from their exile in Babylon, who just used Solomon's name as a literary device.
Right.
But the internal evidence completely refutes that idea. The specific autobiographical details regarding unparalleled wealth, massive architectural projects, and unmatched wisdom, they point directly and exclusively to King Solomon in the 10th century BC.
And his historical setting is the crucial variable here.
Yes. This is the absolute zenith of the Israelite theocracy. Following the military victories of his father, King David, Solomon stepped into a reign of completely unprecedented peace, geographical expansion, and economic dominance.
The sources paint an unbelievable picture of this era. I mean, we are not talking about a moderately successful ancient king living in a slightly larger tent than his neighbors.
No, not at all.
The historical records in the book of 1 Kings state that during Solomon's reign, silver was as common as stones in the streets of Jerusalem. Think about that visual for a second. Silver was treated like gravel.
It is hard to even conceptualize that kind of wealth.
It is. Cedar wood, which was a premium imported building material from Lebanon, was as plentiful as the common sycamore fig trees growing in the local foothills. And the Queen of Sheba, who was a spectacularly wealthy monarch in her own right, traveled from the ends of the earth to see this kingdom.
And she was left completely speechless.
Totally breathless. She was accustomed to luxury, yet the text says the sheer magnitude of his culinary achievements, the architecture of his palace, his wisdom, it overwhelmed her. She admitted that not even half of his greatness had been reported to her.
That level of physical prosperity requires a careful theological distinction. Under the Old Covenant, the Mosaic covenant given at Mount Sinai, God promised the nation of Israel literal, physical, and material blessings in the land as a sign of covenantal faithfulness.
You see this laid out in Deuteronomy chapter 28.
Spot on. If the king obeyed, the crops would yield massive harvests, the enemies would be defeated, and the treasury would overflow. Solomon experienced those physical blessings to the absolute maximum degree. He maxed out the old covenant promises of earthly prosperity.
Which is very different from the new covenant.
Yes. This is distinct from the new covenant, where the Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 1 that the church receives spiritual blessings in the heavenly places in Christ. But Solomon's era had a very dark theological underbelly.
Right, it wasn't all just golden age perfection.
Far from it. Despite all his God-given wisdom, Solomon apostatized in his later years. He directly violated the strict covenantal commands laid out for kings in Deuteronomy chapter 17. Moses explicitly wrote that a king must not multiply horses, multiply wives, or multiply silver and gold for himself.
And Solomon broke all three rules on a colossal scale.
He did. He accumulated massive numbers of horses from Egypt, he hoarded exorbitant wealth, and he married 700 foreign wives. Those foreign wives turned his heart after other gods, leading him into terrible idolatry.
Okay, so let me stop you there, because a natural objection comes up. Why shouldn't I just look at this account and think, this guy's just a cynical billionaire who doesn't know how to be happy?
Right, like a rich celebrity complaining.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if a billionaire gets on television today and tells you money doesn't buy happiness, you roll your eyes. You think, well, you just don't know how to spend it right. Give me a fraction of your wealth and I will show you how to be happy. Why should you and I trust Solomon's assessment of life?
That is a highly natural objection, but it misunderstands the nature of the text. Ecclesiastes is not the diary of a thoughtless hedonist who partied too hard and woke up with a hangover of cynicism.
Okay.
Nor is it the writing of an ascetic monk who hated the physical world from the start and wanted everyone to live in poverty. This is the inspired, retrospective journal of a repentant king at the end of his life. He is surveying the wreckage of his own idolatry.
So he's analyzing it with complete clarity.
Yes, he had the intellect to observe what he was doing while he was doing it. He functioned almost like a new Adam. Think back to the Garden of Eden. Adam was placed in a paradise to rule and subdue it. Solomon tried to use his massive wealth and political stability to recreate the Garden of Eden through architectural and agricultural dominion.
Right.
He had the resources to run a flawless test. If the peak fulfillment of earthly blessing under a literal theocratic government could not satisfy the human soul, then modern man is an absolute fool to try and replicate his experiment. Solomon is effectively saying, do not waste your life chasing what I already caught. I am handing you the lab results. There is nothing there.
Wow. And since he had the resources to run this flawless test, we have to look at the specific things he tested. He starts with the very things our modern culture worships on a daily basis: pleasure and materialism.
Yeah, verses 1 through 11, he breaks it down.
Right. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he outlines this rigorous experiment. And he didn't just dabble in a few weekend hobbies. He states that he applied his heart to test laughter. He tested wine. He built magnificent architectural wonders.
We're talking palaces, sprawling vineyards.
Massive irrigation pools to water his private forests. He achieved total cultural supremacy. He acquired elite male and female singers. He gathered massive amounts of gold, silver, and livestock. He acquired everything a human being could possibly conceive of desiring.
Well, to understand his conclusion, you have to look at the specific Hebrew terminology that controls the entire text.
Okay, unpack that for us.
The controlling word of the book of Ecclesiastes is the Hebrew word hebel. Older English translations often render this word as vanity or meaninglessness, but those words carry too much modern philosophical baggage. They make it sound like nihilism.
Right, like nothing matters at all.
Yeah, but the literal translation of hebel is breath or vapor. It describes something that is transient, elusive, and ungraspable. Picture stepping outside on a freezing winter morning and exhaling. You see your breath for a split second, a white cloud in the air, and then it completely vanishes.
You can't hold on to it.
No, you cannot hold it in your hands. You cannot lock it in a safe. You cannot build a foundation on it. That is hebel.
Like trying to catch fog with your bare hands. You think you have a firm grip on it, but when you open your fingers, there is literally nothing there.
Precisely. And when Solomon evaluates his grand experiment in pleasure in building, he uses a very specific accounting term, yethron. It means advantage or net gain.
So he is looking at the ledger of his life.
He is. He sees all the massive expenditures of energy, the gold spent, the countless hours labored by his workers, the political capital utilized, and he asks, what is the yethron? What is the actual net gain of all this effort?
And his devastating verdict is that the net gain is zero.
Zero. He calls the entire enterprise ra'ut ruach, which translates to a striving after wind or feeding on wind. You can chase the wind all day, you can run until your lungs burn, but you will go to bed starving.
You know, the grammar he uses really highlights the mindset of someone trying to build their own personal utopia. It sounds like someone desperately trying to play the role of the creator.
The Hebrew syntax in these verses is highly revealing. In verse 1, when he says, I said in my heart, he uses the emphatic independent personal pronoun ani right next to the first person verb.
What does that signify?
It translates to I, even I myself. This is the supreme rationalist taking total autonomous control of his destiny. He is the master of his fate, the captain of his soul. And as you read through verses 4 through 8, you are hit with a barrage of specific Hebrew verb forms known as qual perfects.
Call perfects.
Right. In biblical Hebrew, a qual perfect verb describes a completed, undeniable action. It is not, I tried to build, or I was hoping to plant. It is an authoritative declaration. I built, I planted, I made, I bought, I gathered.
Oh, I see.
It is the grammatical equivalent of pounding his fist on the table to declare his total dominance over his environment. It is relentless humanism.
And right alongside those authoritative verbs is the glaring repetition of the prepositional phrase, for myself.
Exactly. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself.
This is the posture of a totally autonomous human heart turned completely inward, trying to construct a universe where it functions as the deity. He sought joy, but because he sought it entirely apart from God, it turned to ash in his mouth.
It always does.
But let me play devil's advocate here. If I look back at the book of Genesis, God creates the physical world and calls it good. He looks at his creation and calls it very good.
Yes, he does.
God created the grapes that make the wine. God created the capacity for human laughter. God gave humans the ingenuity to design incredible architecture and compose brilliant music. Are we bordering on a worldview that hates the physical world? If God made all these things, why is Solomon looking at wine, architecture, and music and calling it all a striving after wind? Are we supposed to feel guilty for enjoying a prime steak, taking a nice vacation, or buying a comfortable house?
That distinction is the hinge upon which this entire theology swings. The text absolutely does not teach that the physical creation is evil. Gnosticism teaches that the physical world is evil and the spiritual world is good, but biblical Christianity vehemently rejects that.
Okay, good.
The title of the analysis we're examining phrases it perfectly. Good gifts make bad gods. The problem is never the gift itself. The problem is the human tendency toward idolatry. The text teaches that when you take a genuinely good gift from creation, like a flourishing career, a loving marriage, a beautiful home, or a fulfilling hobby, and you demand that it provide you with ultimate salvation, meaning, or peace, that gift becomes a cruel god.
Wow. So sin takes a gift and twists it into a savior.
Yes. The things of this world make wonderful servants, but terrible saviors. When Solomon says it is a striving after wind, he is not saying vineyards are evil. He is saying that expecting a vineyard to heal the existential ache of your mortal soul is like expecting a paper umbrella to stop a Category 5 hurricane.
The creation simply cannot bear the weight.
It cannot. It was never designed to.
So, if you treat your career as a way to provide for your family, pay your mortgage, and utilize the talents God gave you, it is a wonderful servant. You can find satisfaction in a job well done. But if you demand that your career gives you your entire sense of self-worth, your identity, and your reason for waking up in the morning,
The moment you fail, or the moment you get laid off, you are entirely destroyed.
spot on. The career becomes a terrible savior that demands constant sacrifices, but offers zero actual security.
Which leads right into the next phase of his experiment. If the absolute peak of human achievement, curated pleasure, and limitless wealth is just a vapor that slips through your fingers, what happens when you introduce the one reality that no amount of money, no amount of gated communities, and no amount of advanced medical science can avoid?
You are talking about the great equalizer.
Death.
In verses 12 through 23, Solomon transitions into a comparison between wisdom and folly. And he is intellectually honest here. He acknowledges that objective wisdom is vastly better than folly. He states that the wise man has eyes in his head, meaning he can see where he is going, while the fool walks in absolute darkness and stumbles.
Right. It is obviously better to make smart financial decisions, eat healthy food, and drive carefully than to gamble away your paycheck and live recklessly.
But then he hits a massive, immovable theological wall. Both the wise man and the fool end up in the exact same dirt.
And this realization causes a psychological breakdown for Solomon. He states in the text that he actually hated life under the sun. That specific phrase, under the sun, defines the earthly horizon viewed strictly on its own terms, without heaven in the picture. It is the secular vantage point.
Okay.
The agony for Solomon isn't just the biological fact that he's going to die. The specific, torturous agony is the terror of his legacy. Because of the reality of total depravity, the biblical truth that every human heart is fallen, corrupted, and bent towards sin, Solomon realizes he has to leave his massive, carefully constructed empire to his successor.
Oh, man.
He has spent his entire life building this geopolitical masterpiece, and he has absolutely no guarantee that his successor won't be a complete fool. All his meticulous planning, his acquired wisdom, his massive savings accounts, all of it will be handed over to someone who did not earn it, does not respect it, and might squander it in a weekend.
And Solomon had a front row seat to the character development of his own son, Rehoboam.
He did.
And if you read the historical accounts in 1 Kings, you see exactly what happens. Solomon dies, Rehoboam takes the throne, and the older counselors tell him to lighten the heavy tax burden on the people to secure their loyalty.
Basic political wisdom.
Basic wisdom. But what does Rehoboam do? He ignores the wise counselors, listens to his arrogant young friends, and says, "My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." In a single foolish conversation, he fractured the united monarchy forever.
It's breathtaking folly.
10 tribes walked away and formed the northern kingdom of Israel. The empire Solomon spent his entire life building, the wealth he hoarded, the alliances he carefully negotiated, destroyed in an afternoon by a foolish heir.
It is a tragic, literal fulfillment of his worst fear. But look at how intensely this applies to modern anxieties. Think about the sleepless nights people endure today trying to build a legacy. People desperately want to project themselves beyond the grave through their estates, their generational businesses, or their charitable foundations.
They want to secure a permanent name for themselves.
Right. They want their name carved into the side of a hospital wing or a university library. Solomon is exposing the total vanity of that desire. You cannot control what happens after you die. You are building a sandcastle at low tide, and the ocean of time is coming to wash it away.
You know, this also completely dismantles the modern prosperity gospel.
Oh, absolutely.
The prosperity gospel tells you that if you have enough faith, if you declare the right words, you will be blessed with health and wealth right now. But Solomon had more health and wealth than any prosperity preacher could ever dream of, and it did not insulate him from the agonies of a fallen world or the certainty of the grave. His wealth actually increased his anxiety because he had more to lose.
The prosperity gospel is exposed here as a complete theological fraud. It attempts to promise heaven without holiness, and it tries to use God as a cosmic slot machine to dispense temporal gifts. It teaches people to worship the gifts rather than the giver. But, as Solomon clearly demonstrates, even if you win the ultimate earthly jackpot, you are still left with the crushing anxiety of losing it all at death.
Wait, hold on. I need to ask a practical question here. You work hard your whole life. You put money in a college fund for your kids. You invest in your local community. You try to build a stable company that provides good jobs for people. Are you saying that planning for the future or trying to leave an inheritance for your children is fundamentally a vexation and a waste of time?
Not at all.
Should I just stop contributing to my retirement account, burn my paychecks on Friday, and not plan for tomorrow at all?
No, and again, we have to rigorously distinguish between stewardship and salvation. Working hard to provide for your family is a biblical mandate. The Apostle Paul writes that anyone who does not provide for their relatives is worse than an unbeliever.
Okay, so there is a mandate.
Saving, planning, and working are callings. The problem arises when you use your work and your planning to try and secure your own immortality. When you are working 80 hours a week because you are terrified of being forgotten, or because you think your massive estate will somehow make your life meaningful after you are gone, that is a miserable idol.
Because you cannot control the future?
You can't. When you try to control the future, it leads directly to the sleepless despair Solomon talks about in verse 23. The text says that even in the night his heart does not rest. The anxious worker lies awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, because the God he is worshiping, his legacy, his control over tomorrow, is incredibly fragile and constantly under threat.
So we are at the absolute bottom of the existential barrel here. If our wisdom, our wealth, our carefully curated experiences, and our hard work are eventually mocked by death and handed over to someone else who might ruin them, is there any actual hope for joy in this life? Are we just supposed to walk around in a state of sanctified depression until we die?
This is where the text makes a massive, unexpected shift, We reach the grammatical pivot in verses 24 through 26.
Yes, the pivot.
This is one of the most magnificent transitions in the entire Old Testament. Up until verse 24, the text has been entirely dominated by the autonomous human ego, the pronoun I. I built, I planted, I gathered. But suddenly the text shifts its gaze away from human autonomy and introduces the hand of God.
In Hebrew, miyad halachim.
Yes. Solomon says, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also, I saw, is from the hand of God.
You know, there's a really brilliant way to visualize this shift in the text from the sources we analyzed. Think about a can of peaches.
Yes, the can of peaches analogy.
Walk us through how this analogy captures what Solomon is saying about the nature of joy.
The analogy of the can of peaches versus the can opener perfectly captures the theological reality of the text. Imagine that material goods, your bi-weekly paycheck, a nice dinner at a restaurant, a beautiful sunset, a healthy family, a functioning car, or a sealed can of peaches.
Okay, a can of peaches, I am tracking.
God distributes these cans of peaches to both the righteous and the wicked. Jesus states in the Sermon on the Mount that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. The physical gifts of creation are distributed widely across humanity.
Right, what theologians call common grace.
Yes. But the spiritual capacity to actually open the can, taste the sweetness of the fruit, and experience genuine, resting satisfaction in the gift, that is the can opener. And the can opener is a distinct, sovereign gift granted only to the person who pleases God.
That is a staggering concept. The unregenerate man gets the can of peaches, but he is standing there trying to smash it open with a rock, or he is trying to break his teeth on the metal, trying to force it to satisfy him. He has the massive house, he has the impressive stock portfolio, he has a luxury car, but he has no actual peace.
He is starving while holding the food.
Starving with food in his hands.
Look closely at the predestinarian contrast in verse 26. God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy to the one who is good in his sight. But to the sinner, the text says God gives the agonizing task of gathering and collecting, only to eventually have it handed over to the one who pleases God.
The sinner accumulates the cans of peaches.
He might have a warehouse full of them,
Yeah.
but he never gets the can opener. He never gets to taste the sweetness of true contentment.
So are you saying that the capacity for me to simply enjoy my dinner tonight with my family or find a genuine sense of satisfaction in my job tomorrow morning isn't something I can just decide to do? I can't just practice mindfulness or read a productivity book or write in a gratitude journal to manifest joy.
No, you can't.
It actually requires a sovereign intervention from God.
The text forces us to that precise conclusion. Verse 25 asks a rhetorical question. Apart from him, who could eat or who can have enjoyment? The ability to find rest and satisfaction in your daily life is not an earned wage. You cannot generate it by sheer willpower or psychological tricks. It is a divine gift.
You have to receive it from the hand of God.
You do. And paradoxically, realizing this is incredibly liberating. It frees you from the crushing burden of forcing your career, your spouse, your children, or your hobbies to provide meaning. When you stop demanding that the creation act as the creator, you are finally free to just enjoy the meal for what it is. A temporary, gracious gift from a sovereign God.
But that brings up a terrifying question. If the can opener, the ability to actually find joy, is only given to the person who pleases God, how do we become that person? Solomon was the wisest man alive. He had the law of God, and he failed miserably. He fell into gross idolatry.
We fail daily.
We break the commandments. If moral perfection is required to receive the can opener, aren't we all doomed to strive after the wind? Where do we find the perfection required to please a holy God?
That is the pivotal question that demands we look at the redemptive historical resolution in the entire Bible. You cannot read the book of Ecclesiastes rightly without looking at Jesus Christ. If you read Ecclesiastes without Christ, you are left with mere moralism, a depressing list of cynical observations about how hard life is.
You have to contrast Solomon with Jesus.
Yes. Solomon is functioning as a first Adam figure. He tried to plant a magnificent garden, build a paradise, and rule over it in his own wisdom. But because of his sin, his garden only produced the thorns and thistles of a cursed existence. Jesus Christ is the last Adam. He did not build a luxury garden for himself. Instead, he willingly entered the agonizing Garden of Gethsemane, sweating drops of blood, preparing to take the curse upon himself.
He wore the crown of thorns that Solomon's sin helped produce.
Exactly.
The contrasts between these two kings are absolutely breathtaking when you lay them side by side. Solomon hoarded vast amounts of silver and gold for his own fleshly indulgence. He taxed his people heavily, placing a massive yoke on their necks to build his earthly empire.
while Jesus Christ, the true King of Kings, impoverished himself. 1 Peter chapter 1 tells us that he did not redeem his people with perishable things like silver or gold, but he shed his own precious blood as a lamb without blemish.
Solomon agonized over leaving a divided, temporary kingdom to a foolish son who would tear it apart. Jesus Christ establishes an eternal, unshakable kingdom that will never be handed over to another.
And Christ provides the ultimate, final answer to the great equalizer of death that tormented Solomon so deeply. Solomon looked at the grave and said, "It doesn't matter if you are wise or foolish, the grave swallows you both." Under the sun, viewed strictly from a secular horizon, the grave always wins. It is the undefeated champion of human history.
But Jesus Christ stepped into the limitations of life under the sun. He took on human flesh. He entered the grave, conquered death, and rose bodily on the third day. Because of the physical resurrection of Christ, the vapor is defeated.
The Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, that because of the resurrection, your labor in the Lord is not in vain. The specific Greek word Paul uses for vain there is kinos, meaning empty or hollow. In Christ, your work is no longer feeble, it is no longer a striving after wind.
Think about it like a brilliant, world-renowned architect. Imagine Solomon is this architect. He has the absolute best materials: Italian marble, steel beams, imported glass. He has the best blueprints and the best construction crew. But he is trying to build a massive skyscraper on a foundation of quicksand.
Doesn't matter how beautiful the building is.
It doesn't matter how hard the crew works. The quicksand of death and sin is inevitably going to swallow the entire structure. Christ is the one who steps in and actually replaces the quicksand with solid bedrock. He secures the foundation so the building can actually stand permanently.
That is a highly accurate way to frame the theology. And to answer your previous question about how we become the person who pleases God, it is solely through the imputed righteousness of Christ. We are not pleasing to God because our track record is flawless or because we try really hard. We are pleasing to God because, by faith, Christ's perfect obedience is credited to our account.
His righteousness is imputed to us.
That is what secures our eternal joy, and it is also what secures our present capacity to enjoy daily life as a pilgrim. We are accepted in the Beloved, which means we can finally relax, stop trying to earn our justification, and receive our daily bread with genuine gratitude.
Understanding what Christ has done completely changes how we interact with the material world today. It pulls theology down from the clouds and puts it right into our living rooms, our bank accounts, and our workplaces.
It makes it incredibly practical.
The analyses we are studying draw out three massive, rigorous, practical applications from this text. First, we have to slay the idol of materialism in our own hearts. Second, we have to rebuke modern, pragmatic, seeker-sensitive church models. And third, we have to embrace what theologians call the tertius usus legis, or the third use of the law.
Let's start with the church.
Yeah, how does Ecclesiastes chapter 2 indict so much of what happens in modern church culture?
The critique of modern pragmatic ministry is devastating. So many modern churches operate on a seeker-sensitive model. They are desperate to attract the secular world, so they use the exact things Solomon tested and proved were entirely empty. They rely on concert-level entertainment, expensive fog machines, stand-up comedy routines from the pulpit, and heavy emotional manipulation.
They are essentially peddling vapor.
They're trying to use the cultural tools of humanism to satisfy the immortal soul. Solomon already ran that experiment with infinitely better resources. He had the absolute best singers and musicians on the planet, and he declared it a striving after wind. The human soul was made for God, and it will only find rest in the robust, unadulterated preaching of the cross of Christ.
Trying to manufacture a spiritual high through earthly entertainment is theological malpractice. It offers people a counterfeit joy that fades as soon as they walk out to the parking lot.
If Solomon's unparalleled choirs and elite musicians couldn't heal his soul, a laser light show on a Sunday morning certainly won't.
Then there's the application for the individual believer concerning the idol of materialism and the third use of the law. Let me quickly define the third use of the law for anyone unfamiliar with the term. The first use of the law acts as a mirror to show us our sin. The second use acts as a curb to restrain evil in society.
Right.
The third use of the law, the tertius usus legis, is for the Christian. It teaches us that because we're already justified by faith alone, the law now acts as a guide for how to live a life of grateful obedience. Because your eternal standing is secure in Christ, you are finally free to hold the things of earth with an open hand.
This connects directly to the teaching of the Westminster Shorter Catechism, which famously states, "Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever." Notice the specific divine order in that statement. You must glorify God first, and in doing so, you receive the capacity for true enjoyment.
When you invert that order, when you seek your own enjoyment apart from God's glory, which is exactly what Solomon did in his experiment, you lose both God and the enjoyment you are desperately chasing.
The third use of the law teaches us that the commandments of God are not a ladder we climb to earn salvation. They are a guide for how to live a life of gratitude because we are already saved. You don't demand that your spouse, your bank account, or your hobbies provide transcendent meaning. You recognize them as the can of peaches graciously handed to you by a Father who has already secured your eternity.
Wait, if my earthly legacy is literally just vapor and my salvation has nothing to do with my own work anyway, why shouldn't I just sit on my couch? Why bother going into the office tomorrow or trying to build a successful business or painting a beautiful painting if it's all going to turn to dust eventually? Isn't this just a massive excuse to be lazy?
The text firmly corrects that misunderstanding. The fleeting nature of life is an alarm clock for holiness, not an excuse for laziness. Knowing that your days are numbered should produce a deep reverence and a desire to steward the time you have been given faithfully.
So the vapor should motivate us.
Yes, you work heartily as unto the Lord, not because your work is going to make you immortal, but as an act of creaturely dependence and gratitude. You change a diaper in faith, you preach a sermon in truth, you run a financial spreadsheet with absolute integrity, knowing that while the physical product may fade, the act of obedient faith is eternally significant.
You are freed from the anxiety of building a permanent legacy, which allows you to throw yourself fully into the work of today. You are free to be faithful in the mundane.
Exactly.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by looking at the crushing weight of autonomous striving under the sun. We saw Solomon, the ultimate test case, build an empire of dirt, only to find it haunted by death and the terrifying uncertainty of legacy. And we followed that dark road all the way to the liberating joy of receiving life as a sovereign gift through the finished work of Jesus Christ.
You are freed from demanding that the creation act as your creator.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on everything we have discussed. Consider the frustratingly temporary nature of your current favorite earthly joy. Think about the fact that the vacation always ends, the delicious meal finishes, the applause fades, the beautiful moment passes.
We naturally lament that transience. We hate that good things end.
We do. But what if that fleeting nature is actually God's severest mercy? What if the vaporous quality of earthly joy is God actively protecting you, making sure you do not chain your immortal soul to a sinking ship?
That reframes the entire human experience.
The disappointment we feel when a good thing ends is just a prompt to look up. It points us to the eternal. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Reformed thinking. Take a breath, look at the gifts in your hands, and eat your bread with gladness today.